Welcome back to the podcast. Your host, as always, Rayanne here. Our guest this episode is Micah Springer. And you guys, we truly kicked it up a notch here. This is our most powerful episode to date, in my opinion. Now, our guest Micah is many things: a Bowspring instructor, a presenter on sustainability in art, Africa, Ayurveda, astrology, and sacred circles and rites, and my favorite part, she is a storyteller. An author, in fact, the author of one of my favorite books, Keepers of the Story. Now, Keepers of the Story starts out in 1993 when two young women, Micah and Cass, set out alone to backpack through Africa for nearly a year. They leap headlong into cultural misunderstanding, crocodiles, and corruption, imperiling their lives and testing their lucky stars. The motherland unveils her deepest mysteries when Micah falls in love with a nomadic warrior and his rich tradition. Sex, alienation, danger, longing, unwritten languages, and moonlight dances become Micah's pathway to inner wisdom and the divine. So, to get us going, I'm going to read to you the intro from Micah's book, after which Fellow Hollow will take us all the way home to our main event, my friend Micah Springer. Some days he walks with me, but you will never see him. He points out fallen feathers, foxes, the smell of cedar and suspended smoke, which reminds me of sitting with him by her fire, listening to them speak a wordless language. Today is the beginning of spring, but the unsure light and the way my breath hangs in the brisk air feel like the beginning of fall. An equinox, equal day and night. Everything, including the light, teeters in the balance, the in-between. Trees budding, but the buds not yet broken open, not yet green, not yet certain on which side of life or death they belong. Life is a love story that keeps telling itself, an unbroken prayer that invokes both the living and the dead. For they are not dead to me. He is not dead to me. He is here with us now. Do not be afraid. It is how we play. He is everywhere I ask him to be, what you would wish of an unbound, timeless lover. I am form, physical incarnate, but I feel sometimes as free as he, floating, not really here, not really there. I know there is a story told by our senses, like seasons, cycling yet linear, winter, spring, the time on the face of a clock, chasing each moment. I smell, I see, I hear, and within that story, there is another told by the mystery, the scenes looping and spiraling, breaking through the veil far beyond senses, the truer version. Let me keep that story. Let me tell it to you.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's just a thrill for me, number one, A, to have a podcast, and B, to have you on it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. No, I guess I would just say I'm a supporter of everything that you do. You inspire me, and I loved our brief but sweet and also poignant time that we got to actually meet. So I've been looking forward to seeing, what has transpired since we last saw one another, and you were in the throes of writing your book and
I'm
much.
still there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know how long it took me, 8 years. So
8
I understand.
years.
Mm-hmm.
That is,
Yeah.
it still boggles my mind. 8 years. And again, I get it. Cause I think I'm in year 5, or this could be year 6. I've lost track now.
You
I think it's
do.
year 5.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there are people that finish books so quickly and they're just such prolific writers. But for me, I think um, I'm a slower processor in many ways. And I like to let something sit for a while, and then revisit it, because that editing as I go to some degree is, I think, helpful for me.
No, absolutely. And I think too, I don't know about you, but I experienced something that's referred to as timeless reliving, and of course disassociation. And which is to say that for me, writing the book is still one of the hardest things I've ever done. And the reason why is because I get lost in the writing of it, because I'm pulling up these memories and I'm having to examine these memories from every aspect and every tool that I have. And so, it's like every time I go into them, I experience it as the 16-year-old, and then I experience it as the 38-year-old. And then I'm trying to pick apart and remember people's facial expressions, the actual conversations we had. And of course, I'm running all of this through PTSD as well, because that's what comes up for you, in this timeless reliving. And, the body it becomes a battlefield, and it takes no prisoners, right? So like when you're dealing with like the emotions and then you're trying to process them, it takes time in order to be honest with the book, and not to tell people what you want them to see, but to share with them, I think, the true evolvement of the, just how the story unfolded. Right.
Yeah, it's such a thrilling genre memoir because of this that you're talking about right now, the timeless reliving, and then also trying to write something when, you and I have this in common, where there's been so much time and distance and growth between who we were as the protagonist in our story then versus who we are now. And so that's just a very different thing to try and reconcile. And then just, and then just the day-to-day of, gosh, and I still have to live right now and pay bills and make decisions and stay current and pay attention and et cetera, et cetera. And then you get lost in this reliving. So it's really, I think it's great that we take the time and choose the truest path that is speaking to us then, because certainly, there's nuances of what we would call true, just because of the filter that we run things through to live, and have no idea really that, everyone thinks they're so objective. Like, you can do your best with that, but it's just not a reality. And I've always laughed at that, and I think that that's why for so long I considered writing mine under a fiction title. So, just because I thought, but then I thought, well, one of the things that's really important about this book is that it's true. It's as true an account as I could give. So there you have it. Anyway.
No. And I mean, that is part of the reason. So for those of you out there listening, I first heard of Micah Springer because she was on one of my favorite podcasts, Tangentially Speaking, and your story, it was so incredible, and it just kept me enthralled. I went back, I listened to it multiple times, and then I was like, where can I get this book? Where can I get this book? And at the time, I didn't know where to find it. And then I went down and visited with Chris in California, and he loaned me a copy you had left him, and then I got to read it. And I could not put it down, which is how I ended up reaching out and contacting you, because I was like, I have to know this person. Like, I just feel like she's a soul sister, and I must meet her in this lifetime.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So would you just indulge me and share with the readers, your book, Keepers of the Story, and just tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Let's see. It's always, where do you start? And it's also a very different thing. So I self-published in August of 2017. So there's been a lot that has transpired since that. But the memoir is about traveling through mainly sub-Saharan Africa with my best friend, backpacking when we were 20 in 1993. And having really no idea what we were doing, but an insatiable quest for adventure and some deepening, I'll say. We were both interested in transformative practices, travel being one of the best, and especially, I think, at that age. So the main part of the story, well, I guess what I should say is I divided it into 3 categories, because I'm also a dedicated practitioner and instructor of yoga and body-mind paradigm. So I wanted to have body, mind, spirit as kind of the main themes. And then it coincided perfectly with how I was really introduced to Africa, in that the first part, body, the first part, mind, was really very intellectual. And it was about everything that I had read or everything that I had imagined or had seen, in the news. And therefore, that was my point of accessibility, and it didn't really penetrate. The travel didn't really penetrate for about 3 months. And then I met a lover and a soulmate, and he's from the semi-nomadic culture called the Samburu people of northern Kenya. And because he was my lover, suddenly my body and my senses, and I was permeable on a much different level. So the second part of the book, after I meet him, is body, and then the third is spirit, because I was so broken when I returned home, away from him, away from Africa in general, and dealing with the truth that I hadn't yet quite exposed of my own culture and where I was from, or sometimes a culture-less culture. Mm-hmm. And so I just, had this devastation of spirit, and then the rebuilding of that and what that required of me. And that's also where I introduce myself very, very briefly as a body-mind practitioner, enthusiast. And so that's the story. And I'm still in touch with the village. I still visit the village where I first met him and see his family. And, I help contribute with some of their lives, not only financially, monthly, but I've also helped some of my brothers go to school. One is just finished with med school and wants to open a clinic in the village. Yeah. So there's just so many things. I mean, the story just has never ended. And my parents, Apaya and Yeyo, who have a central part in forming me in the book and in real life, they are still alive. And so that's a really fascinating thing. Whereas before, I couldn't be in touch, we're talking 1993. And so 1993, 94, there wasn't even the internet, or it was being used in, government offices, but you didn't have any public access. And, and there wasn't, Facebook and WhatsApp and et cetera, et cetera. So I was so heartsick and homesick for this place that I had discovered within me. And now I can hear updates daily. Yeah. So it's fascinating how so much changes, but that timeless reliving is a little bit of a current, I think maybe with the coronavirus and so many things that have coincided in my in my own personal life with just taking a pause and this time to reflect. And suddenly I'm just really aware how much a part of my daily life my African story still is. And that fascinates me.
That's so beautiful. Just, that you're in a space that you can recognize that.
Yeah, that's true. I guess, the fact that I feel like we're moving slowly and it may just be me, but I have noticed that my mental acuity has been somewhat diminished over this hiatus from what feels like stimulation and living, or what we first thought of. And it's such a funny thing because I remember coming back from the village. So I've been subsequently about, maybe 10, 12 times.
Mm-hmm.
And since 1993, 94. And every time that I return from there, it's an adjustment. But because I have the expectation now, it's also a little easier. But I will say that I always secretly think, I wish everybody could know what they're like in a village.
Right.
Because there's a I don't know why, but this French word just popped into my head, but dishabille, which is, you're disheveled. You are all of those layers, whether it's clothing or personality or stress reactors or whatever it is, are suddenly taken off. And what's exposed is this really beautiful and often frightening, simply because we recognize that we've sacrificed it, aspect of ourselves that feels so pure and so clear.
I can definitely relate to that. But I remember when I was, a part of the gang, it was really fascinating. I was reading a book recently. It's called, I think it's called The Body Keeps the Score. And they were discussing the different ways in which they help to rehabilitate children of trauma back into society and or into like a foster care system. And what's interesting is what they use is that sense of community and tribalism, and they get them used to interacting and playing, and they help them to sense their body in a different way. And it reminds me, or I had this weird epiphany, and I bring this up because of a story in your book, Keepers of the Story, which is, I remember when we would get home from working on the streets, it was a group energy effort to shake off anything that had happened. And what took place within the group was the joking and the singing, and it was the interaction, it was the constant touching, it was group cuddling almost, where everyone would just kind of pile into a circle, boys and girls, and it helped to release a lot of that stored trauma, and it was like a shaking out of it, and that reminds me of a story that you had spoke of. And I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on that? Because you have moved into a new practice since we last spoke, as well as your experience with trauma and with your family in Africa.
Well, I guess where I would start is, this has come up for me a lot recently, and just considering. So I'm in a committed relationship with a Ghanaian man from West Africa. Currently, we live together, and we are waiting to relocate to Ghana, which we had intended to do at the end of April, but with everything COVID, etc., we're now here together. And then we have the Black Lives Matter protests. And so we've been speaking a lot about trauma in the body. And I also have become acutely aware of even the trauma of white privilege. Mm-hmm. And that's going to sound really camp to someone who has endured so much. But but I'm also having to claim this position in my own life, because what you and I don't share is this acute trauma. Now, that said, what I didn't know was happening through my yoga practice and through my breath work and through my meditation practice, because I really came to most of that to just become a better athlete. That was my ignorance and my naivete. And I don't remember, I'm sure somebody did, but I don't remember anyone specifically saying any trauma that you have held in your body like this, these etheric scars, they have a chance to be dissolved here. No one said that, but I was recognizing, because I was very astute and I was very devoted. I am very devoted. And therefore, I was watching myself, and I was literally watching this undoing. And I guess the point is, it may not even matter if we know what's occurring, just as long as we are doing it together, like your sense of this community. In Kenya specifically, I think you're referring maybe to the dance. Are you referring to the traditional dance and the convulsing that occurs there?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So that was such a sublime, I want to say, possession or repossession of what it means to be a human being on this earth, a porous, sensitive, sensing human being on this earth, and the reclamation of the animal within us. It's such a popular theme now, this rewilding, and I was so fortunate not to have gone through the intellectual Western subconscious, where we're extremely aware of ourselves and of being judged and of being singled out and not feeling community. I think that's what happens when you're not raised in a village. Mm-hmm. And you're always on the outskirts of everyone else. That marginalization creates a greater fear, even though we think we've chosen it. We think, okay, I want this independent house, and I can't imagine living with all of you out there. That would make me insane. But at the same time, I'm increasingly more aware of being ostracized.
Yes.
You couldn't, don't push me any further. It's like we're all saying to each other, don't push me any further than this independent home at the edge of your city, because that's as far away from you as I can be. And so that convulsing that occurs in the dance, after the dance, was such a beautiful reminder of where I couldn't go until I let go of my self-consciousness and realized that they wanted me, they were begging me to melt this barrier that existed between my heart and my mind body. So that was a lovely, I mean, trauma. These warriors are given access as conduits. So what I noticed is that the outside of the circle that was holding the space for the dancers inside, the warriors, girls and boys, they were holding the space, and they were being able to heal their own trauma from the convulsions of the warriors, and also from catching them. So that was a really beautiful, if you want an explicit play-by-play, I can do that, but I wasn't sure if you were kind of asking me to just look in again from the side, or go play-by-play of how it works.
For the listeners, just let's do a play-by-play for them, and also just because I love listening to you talk. You just have, your voice is like Prozac to me.
Oh, that's so
sitting here just like sprawled out. I'm like, oh, don't stop.
That's so sweet. And I have to tell you, this is not good for my marketing, but my self promotion. But I did do an audio book of keepers, And I got told by several people, which was not my intention, of course, but that they love to go to sleep to it.
Yes, that is the best compliment.
So the play-by-play is just that. So these dances are done around ceremony. They're done around some maybe intertribal tragedy. Anytime there's a call for a gathering, they're done in accordance with full moons. And so there's not really a particular rhyme or reason, but suddenly a group will start generally like, by midnight or let's say 1 a.m. There's this, you're in deep sleep in your hut, and suddenly there's this thudding on the earth and this very resonant, deep, soulful bellowing of all of these warrior voices combined. And it's the most lovely, hypnotic, and also evocative. So it literally calls you from your sleep. And we all walk around, almost somnambulists. We're just like entranced until we get to the center of the village where this is taking place. And then if it's in the heat of day, which it often is as well, you get these like fever pitches of just intense heat and everybody's sweating. And it's such a purging, a psychic purging as well. And then after the warriors dance, they will kind of run off, and there's a team to catch them if they convulse. And it doesn't happen every time. It just happens when it happens. And it feels very raw and pure. And they have this body of people, of arms that they run into specifically as protection. And it's just a lovely, I guess, the portrayal of what it means to be held in a village and in community. And it also reminds me so much of what I've heard of Mayan culture, and how instead of like somebody in the village, in the small folds of the community, being ostracized because they suffer from mental illness, they're actually embraced deeper, and it's no less messy. It's no less inconvenient. It's still a massive inconvenience, but it's one that everybody has signed on to participate in. And so, these warriors, when they're convulsing, it's difficult to hold their shaking, vellicating body. And yet that's what we sign up to do, and to lay you to the ground as you need, or to help you back to your feet as you need. And so I really love that. I love that. And I love the fact that I couldn't quite go there, but that I flirted with it. I definitely played with losing myself to that crowd of strangers, because they felt so possible. And they made me so perfectly comfortable, because they truly wanted for me to let go. And I don't even think they really were aware of what, because it's not like they have an awareness that, that's the Western world. They're just extremely intellectual, and they're kind of out of their bodies, and they're really in their heads, and they have fear. They don't have that, at least not at this particular village or dance. They didn't have that education. But it was just a sense, this person is closed around their heart somehow. And we know this is our medicine. Had I been traumatized, and I mean overtly, terribly, obviously, had it been that kind of trauma, I don't think I'm a good lead for that, because I don't want to sit here and say, oh, well, you just have to, because I don't know. I know that the reason that I use and continue to use yoga, the bowspring, to heal and to grieve, is because it's effective. But if I wasn't already living in my body, because I came to it from being an athlete. So the perspective was very different, but the outcome was similar in that I was already in my body and it was a perfectly comfortable place for me to be.
Mm.
And so I think that's really an important sensitivity to have. Because if the body has not, has been abused and is not a comfortable place to be, how would you inspire someone to actually want to live there again? And yeah.
Well, I think for me, one of the important parts about this conversation is I actually really wanted to, you have acknowledged, you openly acknowledged in your book and then in the conversation, because we had the pleasure of getting to do coffee in Vancouver on your last visit, is your experience with grief. And I think that grief is not spoken about enough. I think that people sidestep other people's discomfort and they're afraid to trigger people into feeling, which I think is the exact opposite of what we need to be doing. I believe that the triggers are there to show us that we need deeper healing, and that we need to, maybe not confront, but we definitely need to approach our pain and understand where it stems from. And we need to become friends with it in a way that we no longer get trapped with it, but we can learn how to sit with it and to feel it and to help it pass on its way through. Can you talk to us a bit about your own experience with grief and just the ways in which you approached it? And just like the different findings and the different things that came to you to help you move through it.
Perfect. Yeah. It's one of my favorite topics, which sounds so morbid, and I can't take credit. I was grieving and then I found my teachers. But what was beautiful is that I was grieving and I got to where the teachers say you should get to all by myself. So I feel really good about that, only because it feels like there's an element of deep, deep universal truth for us in that, because I didn't come to grief through an intellectual process. It was only after that I kind of started studying what is grief. And one of my favorite teachers is, I'm big on showing the way back.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's important. And I'm so tired of everybody taking credit for the things they think and not somehow doing a little bit of investigative work to say, where did that come from though? It's too easy to just say, well, it just occurred to me. But the truth is, seeds were planted along the way and suddenly, you picked the fruit. So where are some of those seeds? So some of my seeds are Martin Prechtel. He has a phenomenal and free YouTube discussion on grief and praise. And there's 3 different, what do you want to call those? So he breaks it. I think he's actually presenting in Minnesota and someone's recording him. And so they broke it down into 3 sections. So grief and praise, it's phenomenal. And if I can paraphrase a little bit and then run it through my own system, we grieve because we loved so deeply. And in the grieving is the praising. And so you have to do it because it's another form of loving greatly. If you block the grieving, you have truncated the love that transpired between whatever it is that you're grieving, that you're saying goodbye to. And in that, you're not able to fully honor the living, either your own or that which you're, that person or being or what that you're grieving the loss of. So I quickly started to see that my tears, and the Sufis talk about this also, Rumi poems, there's lots of reference to, the crack in us is how the light gets in, Leonard Cohen's song. So these are all pointing in the same direction, which is from that deep, deep heartbreak, and brokenness of self even comes the opportunity to relish the living again. And so there you have that grief and praise, that grief and praise. And when you love something so deeply, to not grieve it fully doesn't allow you to move on. And grief is not sadness. So it isn't just like being beaten up, but sadness feels like an end to me. There's no ecstasy that comes from sadness. There's only a deeper sense of depression. And maybe someone would say that sadness is actually from the inability to grieve. Mm. So, when we really understand grief is like a compost in a garden. And you've got all of the experiences heaped, and you're trying to reconcile who you are, who you've become via all of these different experiences. And you're willing to do the work and set the intentions and hold the focus and stay devoted until you polish the gem and you come out in an ecstatic state that brings you closer to living. So that's kind of how we know we've really fully grieved, is suddenly there's an element of forgiveness, either for self or other or all. And there's a deeper union that can be palpably experienced. And it's good work. It's such good work. But yes, I was grieving my lover, and I was trying to do it thousands of miles from where I embodied him. If you embody a relationship, in the desert of Kenya is where I felt him. And therefore, it was really difficult for me to do it here. And in many ways, the memoir was cathartic because it allowed me to grieve. And grieve I really did, And now, Rayanne, there's just this eternal awareness of this connection between us that no longer looks at all like it did when we first knew one another.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not in this kind of shellacked picture frame. It doesn't even feel like that at all. It feels like the transformation of him and the transformation of me is still somehow deeply unified. But it has created an entirely different picture. And I love that about human relationship.
I love that you said that, because that's something that this year, or maybe it was last year, but it was at some point in here. Sorry, my dog is waking up. You'll hear her snoring and huffing throughout the thing. She's so funny. But what I realized is, through my grief, it's been about 6 years and since he died, and I've become a different person. And there was this love and joy and gratitude that I found in his death. But what I found is that his death brought me it was the catalyst for my own transformation, and it brought me so much closer to the universe, just to divine, to everything within myself and without. And I recognize, what I find so interesting is that it has in no way has it lessened my love for him, the distance and the time. But I recognize that the person that I am now, the person that I have become, would not fall in love with the person that he was that I met. Does that make sense?
Of course. Yes.
And I'm able to look at that and say, I'm so grateful for the love that we shared and that it was ours. We kept it very private. I didn't speak about what took place because he was my lover, and we didn't talk about any of these things outside of ourselves. And the person I am now, like I said, there's just this ecstasy that I'm able to be who I am, and to know that the part that he played in my life led to this transformation, led to this ecstasy, this gratitude that I'm able to embody just even more. I'm just fuller. I'm just a better human being for it all. And I think
that's what I mean. Oh, sorry, love.
No. Sorry, but I was just going to say, like, that's what I heard you saying is similar to what, you expressed it much more eloquently than I have. But that's the point that you get. That's the grief of it. And I think allowing yourself the time to grieve and to not put a time limit on it, and to understand, like you said, there's a difference between sadness, depression, trauma, and then true grief. Like, even when it comes, like when people ask me about, rape and my experiences and devastation, and I look at it and I have no regrets. People come up to me and they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you." And I'm just like, but why? Like, everything that's happened is just, I've had the time to grieve, and now all I see is the goodness in everything, the ecstasy in my life. And I've known, these traumas that are this pain. I've known the depth of despair. And I also know the height of ecstasy, and the two intermingle for me on a daily basis. But at no point in time, I can't, there's not even a fraction of me that regrets anything that's happened, and I think that grief allows you to move into that, and to be able to express that. What are your thoughts on it?
So grateful. Well, exactly. And I think why I love to use the metaphor of compost, because, compost is your discards. You make compost out of the things that you've discarded, and they've just kind of gradually built up. You bring them out and then it stinks. It stinks, and the squirrels try and eat it, and all the things try and come and take their bit. But if you stick with it long enough and you just keep going, then it becomes this incredible fertile amendment for your soil that then grows the most wonderful roses. And if I think that if we just recognize, I think you only have to do true grieving work once to realize the genius of it. And then you're hooked, because there is such a clarity, it's like your whole being opens up into this truer reality that brings us out of victimhood and into the strength of participation. I'm engaged. I am in this world and not of it, but I am certainly in it. And
I love. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, please. So anyway, I my thoughts are exactly with you, and I don't want it to sound trite, because sometimes people are so courageous, but to really praise something that hasn't yet left us has an aspect of grief in it. So I'll say that again. When we're truly loving, let's just, use I'll just use my current relationship, which I feel is going to be the last. I've said that before. No, have I? Maybe. I'm so madly in love. Let me say it like that. But when I tell him how madly I'm in love with him, and, and how, and what I feel like, and et cetera, it always touches on this grieving, because I do know that one day we won't be together. And I can't imagine that. And yet you have to, a little bit every day, to stay truly present to the praising. So that's what I'd like to say about knowing grief, and so blessed to have these teachers in our lives that are accessible, some living, some no longer, but their work is living, that reminds us, allow for this deep, deep penetration of life to shake you to the core. Because grieving it's not a napkin dabbing at the corner of an eye that is reluctant to shed a tear. It doesn't look like that. It looks like madness.
oh, it feels like madness.
It does. It feels like madness. But guess what? So does ecstasy sometimes.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely. And I love the way you put that, because it's exactly true. I mean, both the polarity and yet the way that they fuse together to just create one is so poetic, and it's so magical, and it's hard to explain until you're in the throes of it, you know. And I remember it felt like that for me. The grieving felt like madness, and it was, you know. But I think that you have to lose yourself to find yourself. And as cliche as that, you know, might sound, it's about, I think acknowledging aspects of attachment to identity. And I love that you brought up victimhood, because I'm such an advocate for, there's a difference between being victimized and being a victim. And I think one of the important things to understand is that that you are capable of victimizing yourself after an experience, because we sometimes cling to an identity, you know, especially in the storm of not knowing what's going on around us. We can cling to something trying to save ourselves. But unfortunately, those attachments actually often lead us to isolation, and they allow us to, you know, build an island where we can sometimes be very much left to our own devices. And then we form armor and quirks and coping mechanisms that actually lead us further and further astray from the true source within ourselves of empowerment and, you know, accountability and willingness to, you know, be explorers of our own soul and hearts and mind and bodies. I feel that it's important to touch down on that when you're going through grief, you will experience those things. You will experience maybe feeling like a victim. You will experience anger. You will experience frustration. Like, I don't know about you, but I mean, there was this one day, I remember after about 6 months or 8 months after my lover died, and I was so angry. I had actually gone on a date, and I left the date, and I was so overcome with rage that I had to pull my truck over on the side of the road for fear of driving into oncoming traffic. And I was terrified of myself. I was scared of that power, you know. And that's something I think that we all need to acknowledge within ourselves, is that the power that comes from that can actually make you feel strong, even though you need to collapse into it. And that was one of the things I did, is I fought it for a very long time. And there would be, you know, instances where I would fall to the ground and just snot and tears and screaming and pound my fist into the earth and just like a wild animal, just lose my coconuts. And that was needed, though, you know, and I think that a lot of us were scared of those visceral reactions to the strength of our emotions. And then we suppress that, which again, that just isolates us on that island, because then we're so scared to express those feelings to somebody else for fear of, you know, maybe bothering them, or for fear of judgment, or for fear of being misunderstood, or we don't want to hurt them, you know. And again, it just separates us even further from the people that we actually need the most. Yeah. Anyways, that's all I have to say about that.
Well, you're such an amazing example. Just really you're unique in so many ways, in both what you've experienced, but also how you've allowed it, to be the compost. And I wonder, because I think for me, the grief, it was loss. It was just loss, and it was acknowledging the choices that I made in that loss.
Yeah.
And
that's accountability.
Right. That's the accountability. And I think the driving force is that I felt like the experience could break me, where unalterably, where I would not reclaim a contented life.
Mm-hmm.
And I just refused. As sad as I was, as grief-stricken as I was, as sometimes despondent or angry or whatever the stage was for that particular sensation, I just refused to let it stop there. And I kept really wanting to reclaim this love of life and living. And maybe that's where, maybe that's something you and I think that is something that, even though we haven't really spoken it together, it's probably why we're attracted to one another, because now I am, I'm like a raccoon with shiny objects. It's like, who's got the biggest shine going on? Which basically means they had, a lot of polishing of the gem, whether through life's experiences or seeking teachers and transcendental experiences, whatever the mechanism for that polishing, it's certainly attractive to me.
Oh, I agree. People that, I think that there's a hunger for life that I find so enchanting, to be honest with you. Someone who, is just willing to devour everything around them, whatever experience comes their way, and to accept ownership for their choices too. I think I'm really attracted to the people that, that own their experiences and own their challenges and are, willing to be like, yeah, I made that choice and this is what came of it, but look at everything I've learned. Like, at least now, in my 20s, I was definitely attracted to a different type of person. But now I think now as you move through your healing, I think we're looking for that mirroring effect, right? And people that are capable of introducing us to new ways of thinking or new ways of being, people that are capable of enriching, but also holding boundaries, and being able to stay true to their own path at the same time as being willing to highlight and enhance yours. I think that that's such an attractive quality in a human being. Like, that's, the way that you owned your story, and the way that right at the end of the book, and I don't want to spoil it because I really, really want people to go find this book on Audible and or go to your website and purchase it. The way that you owned it at the end, your grief and your sadness, and the way that you spoke about not being able to go back to Africa, but at the same time, it was also a choice you seem to have made, and you stuck with it and you owned that. That to me was really it wasn't just remarkable. It was encouraging and empowering, to see somebody else out there. It's like a permission slip to say, hey, you can make these choices and you can honor the grief that comes even when you make that choice, like that to me is such an exciting possibility at a time when I needed to hear that the most. So I have to credit you and your book for helping me move through, my loss and whatnot. So thank you.
No, gosh, it's really the reason that I wrote it was, even though I didn't quite have these teachers that I've subsequently found, but about grief in particular, I just wanted to share that there's another way to be in relationship to both grief and death.
Mm-hmm.
And we can choose those. They're not often understood or talked about. They're certainly not heralded, but at the same time, they feel like the ancients. These were their methods. This is how they did life and living. So thanks for saying that. And I did get a lovely compliment from. So I really loved working with my editor, Barb Richardson. She was amazing, and we just fell in love through the process. And friends, I mean, I'd like to call her a friend, but we just don't have the occasion to speak that often. But anytime that we want to, it's there for us. And I think she just said recently that she loved the book, and that she felt so proud of me and us in working with it. And yet she only got it on the level that I intended when she just recently helped her sister through cancer, and her sister died. And she said, I hadn't experienced grief from loss yet. And therefore, I was relatively protected from that particular layer of the book. And so that was such a huge compliment for me, that, what started out as something she believed in as a project and she thought was amazing, touched her on such a profound level once she could understand what the hell I was talking about. Through her own experience, and this is my editor. So I just thought, oh, that's just so cool. It's just such a beautiful, again, pointer to a universal truth, that if we stay with the loving, and I mean really loving hard, where you're willing to be vulnerable, you're willing to say the things that, with accountability, knowing full well that these are risky, and sometimes you misjudge a character and you become vulnerable with the wrong person, damn it. And, then you have that lesson to learn, et cetera, et cetera. But if we love hard, we're praising hard. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we will grieve hard. And all of it is beautiful.
I love that you brought that up. And I want to touch on that a little bit more, which is, being open and vulnerable with people who, I don't want to say haven't earned it, but haven't earned it, and making those mistakes. Can you just touch down a little bit more on what you mean? I know how I interpreted it, because, oh man, I made some huge, some huge mistakes, and I don't even like to call them mistakes. I've had some huge lessons in that department. Can you expand on that for us?
I think what I'm referencing, and I have too, I've learned some really good, I've learned boundaries, for one thing, and I've learned to state very clearly what I want. So I had a great teacher. He unfortunately passed this last year, but he gave me some gems that I continue to play. And one of the things he said to me when I was single, and I was really sad because I wanted to experience partnering, mostly because I thought I was going to be not very good at it. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to be tested in this way. And I wanted to do the work together and dig in and like make it messy. And, and so that intensity, you can hear like my poor potential male suitors, like just running, in the opposite direction as I'm even speaking now. Like I just, I wanted to jump in all the way, and it didn't have to look any particular, we didn't have to live together. We didn't necessarily have to get married or anything like that. It was more just about the intensity of the vulnerability and the willingness. And so here I am, I'm longing for this connection. I can sense it. I know it exists. And I also had to admit that I hadn't experienced it, either because I wasn't willing or they weren't willing. And so partnering hadn't really shown up in my life. Just to be clear, my lover that the book is written about, we only knew each other 58 days. So while I was madly and soulfully in love with him, and still to some degree I am in that very other, etheric way, we didn't get to partner. We didn't get to do the laundry together. Mm-hmm. And so my teacher says to me, Micah, the way you'll know is that you'll choose him rather than just being chosen. And I thought, oh, you're right. I mean, I've had lovely partners. I'm going to use I'm going to use a small p there, because like I said, there was some issues. And so they've been lovely beings in my life. But what I recognized is so often they were choosing me. They were just pursuing me. And I just kind of said, okay.
Right.
how stupid. Like, I mean, that's crazy that I'm so driven in my life, and I'm so, you can hear, I've got intentions, I have focuses, I have these devotions. And yet in my most important area, I was just kind of willy-nilly, you know? And I don't know why that occurred. Like, I just don't understand. I kept thinking, okay, I'll tell you one thing. This is where spiritual bypassing will really put you in trouble. But I kept thinking, well, I guess it's just meant to be, because it is. And again, it's just like this passivity. Like, well, I bumped into the person, so it must just be that we're supposed to be together. And really, there wasn't a whole lot of like discerning choice in it, where I would come to it with a sagacity, where I'm like really doing the work and looking through and saying, this is how, because now what I feel about relationship is that our wounded, traumatized children are just learning to play together. And it's kind of like, do the wounds complement one another's healing, or do they exacerbate the wounding? And if you're clear on what you want, because exacerbating the wounding, it has its own path to healing. It's just kind of a longer, more traumatic path. Than finding someone who's got wounds, but for some reason, their particular version of wound works with yours in a way that you feel like you have a chance at healing. Mm-hmm. And that takes choice. That took me choosing. So I pursued the man I'm in love with now for 6 weeks ardently. I walked barefooted where he walked, just so that I could try and put out, in whatever way I could possibly bewitch him to just give us a chance. Just show your face again, because I think there's something really intense here. And body as barometer, for me, that's my area of interest and passion and devotion, is how does it feel? And so I knew how it felt when I saw him the first time, and I had never felt anything like that. And that feeling I pursued. And in that pursuit, I was doing the choosing. And as I was doing the choosing, he was becoming the perfect partner for me. So
that's beautiful.
I don't have a ton of experience with being... I've made some really dumb decisions and have stayed in things way longer than was necessary, but like you, I just don't feel like I don't want to spend a lot of time regretting those, because I also did the work on the other side of it, which was to grieve whatever it was that I chose, the opportunity cost of being in this relationships for 7 years. What did I miss out on? What did I spend a lot? And mostly it's in time and energy spent, isn't it? It's like, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I was going to agree with you. I feel that when we stay longer than what we would have liked, or when we look back and we go, how did I not leave that relationship sooner? I look at it and I always just say to myself, listen, you were sending out a vibration. There was a lesson that you needed to learn there, and you clearly weren't learning it, and you had to learn it. And even if you would have left that relationship, say, 2 years in instead of 4 years in, even if you would have held strong the first time you saw those red flags and you didn't run, the next person you brought into your life, you would have attracted the exact same qualities, because you still hadn't learned the lesson. And so I think that by choosing to stay in something and see it through is almost a commitment to that growth within self, and going, okay, well, I think that when you can find a loving way to accept the choices that you made and still make the best of it, that it allows you to look back on that time with gratitude, versus looking back on it with frustration, at self, for maybe not having figured it out soon enough. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Oh gosh, absolutely. I feel like that's why I don't spend time in the regret, but definitely something that needs to be grieved, for me anyway, is, wow, I spent a lot of time and energy bemoaning that relationship as opposed to, let's say, writing poetry or or gardening or these other things that I really love to do. Instead, I was really hooked. And so then I just used that information to say, okay, back to vulnerability, back to transparency. This isn't working for me, or this is working for me. And this is why, back to grieving, back to praising. It all seems to be very much a part of an authentic life.
Yeah. And I want to put in here too, I think that also, when we open up to people, sometimes we do need to look at our motivation as to why we're sharing with people that, at least for me, I mean, again, I can't speak for anybody else. I have found myself in the position in the past of wanting to connect and or wanting that love that I feel might be elusive. I really struggled with my own mother on this one when we came back together, which was like, you want to share everything with them because you want to show them all these wonderful things about yourself. But then I learned really fast that there were times when I would share and they weren't able to connect with that. And then I would feel rejected as a result, which would be like, oh, there must be something wrong with me. I'm not doing this right. I'm not living my life right. I'm not, and then I would shift or pivot my own actions, trying to change myself in a way that would allow me to connect with them. And that was probably the hardest lesson that I have learned this year, which is the boundary setting and saying, no, wait, you have to choose what you share with people, because not people can only meet you on the level as that they are willing to meet themselves at. And if people haven't done the work that you've done, and then you try to share this thing with them, they haven't actually earned that, and they're not going to be able to understand it. And so you can't lay an expectation at their feet of connection over it if you do the work beforehand and you openly acknowledge that these people might not be able to meet you there. And I think, like you said, with my mom coming to that conclusion and really having to be like, oh, what can I share with you that will allow us to connect on a level that is supportive and encouraging and, encompassing of our love for one another. But what will I not share with her because that'll make me feel like shit about myself, because it'll feel like rejection. And then if I know that there's that trigger there, then clearly I'm not comfortable within whatever choice it is that I've made or experience that I've had. And I need to go back to the drawing board and do some deeper work here so that I can sit firmly within my boundaries. And when I do choose to share this, there's no angle at which I'm trying to have someone else meet my expectations that I can't meet yet for myself.
Well said. Yeah. And so difficult to discern, for one thing, because we're in such a loud in that we talk a lot culture. And so a lot of our words, they lose their energy and we lose the steam behind the words because we're just constantly dissipating that energy and it's being dispersed, like mist. And learning how to not talk is something Africa has really shown me. And I don't mean that in a way, because Africa is also very loud and very ceremonial and very celebratory. And, there's a lot of expression. So it isn't this reticence of shyness or, some kind of like, it's not that timidity. It's actually a wisdom where good relationships, whether it's intimate or friendships or even our familial work that we're still doing, it takes time. And the reason it takes time is because, we're not computer software. You can't download me in 2 minutes. You have to put in the time that is required for listening and asking questions. And so one thing that is really seductive in my life is a mate or a friend or even a teacher that asks questions about me. And then it allows me to ask them. And that's just such a rich exchange to be able to ask deeper questions. I mean, even I'm hoping that I'm even able to ask a new question that just occurs to me after, let's say, 14 years of being in relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's it's so honoring, isn't it, of the fact that we are not just set in stone. We're dynamic blueprints, and we're constantly shifting and changing and growing and evolving. And therefore, it seems really honoring of that to just stop and say, and who are you today?
I love that. I believe that our lives are, the way that we perceive life is not a linear event. And I love the re-asking of questions, because, you could have asked me something 10 years ago, and now, now that spiral of healing, like, again, healing's not linear. It's not, oh, hey, I solved this riddle and now I'm going to carry on. I think that you revisit the symptoms, and you revisit the somatic memory, and you revisit behavioral patterns, and you revisit all these things in a spiral until you get to the core of the topic or the conversation or the wound. And I love that, being able to ask, like you said, a partner, say 14 years later, something, and have them answer it in such a way that, it's just depth. I want to say depth. Now I can't even say, I can say the word in my head because it's not a real word. It's like gratifying, but with depth. Mm-hmm. And to be able to explore them, from a new angle, from their new learning, from their new experiences, and to see that richness come alive in their own expansion of understanding, of what's going on around them and their reality. I think that that's so remarkable. And I think, I look at, like, say, my relationship, with my mom, and I go, what I know about her today is so beautiful. And I can ask her questions today that I wouldn't have known to ask, 14 years ago, or that I couldn't have asked 14 years ago. Mm-hmm. And then I think that allows you to examine your own self and the responses that brings about in you, that the physiological, like the feeling, like when you ask a question yourself to me, or when you say something and my body physically responds to you, it's just, there's something so remarkable about that, Yeah,
and think about this. You don't have the desire as much if somebody is constantly talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guilty of the same. If someone is constantly telling me about themselves, I don't have as much desire to inquire.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's kind of like they're just playing the story on the projector for me 24/7. And so I don't actually have, it's not out of a meanness that I may not be as inspired to ask or, seek with curiosity, but it's really because the function of what we've set up together didn't allow for enough stillness and space and silence for my curiosity to be piqued. And so that there is a real benefit to, let's say, if I were dating, one of the ways that I would subliminally interview is, are you curious about me? Do you know how to ask a question of a human being, another human on the planet? Like, how do you feel about this? That is so, whether they're going to become a friend or a lover, it doesn't matter. They're going to become an intimate person in my life because we'll have cared enough to ask. And I haven't ever digitally dated, but I have girlfriends that have and that are, and one of their main despairs with the whole function is that people just don't ask one another enough question.
I 100% agree. I found that I've even kind of moved on from certain friendships where I was asking the majority of the questions, wanting to know them. And
as you create this podcast interview. And I've found myself several times being like, oh, I want to ask Rayanne about that. And then I'm like, slapping my wrist virtually by saying, well, it's not your podcast. Just
you know what? Ask away. Cause like I'm so transparent. It's embarrassing how transparent I am. So.
Well, okay. Then the next time that I have that inclination, I'll follow.
Yeah, no, give her. But to go back to what I was saying there real quick, just that, like I said, I had friends and this was like the hardest part for me. And maybe you can shed some light on it for me. I had friends, people that came into my life and they would tell me, you're my best friend. And I was like, well, that's really beautiful. And thank you. And I'm honored, but I can't say the same. And I didn't understand why. I mean, I didn't say all of that. I mostly just said, thank you. But I couldn't understand why I wasn't capable, like why I couldn't feel the same. And I think what came up was that this sounds kind of selfish, but it was like I was digging and asking them questions and, like really trying to like pull out the answers and get beyond the surface. And, I wanted them to expand upon their life. I wanted them to feel like they had a safe place to come to and to have the conversations and to see things, differently. And what I found was that the people were very comfortable, sharing like answers if I asked a specific question, but they didn't know how to interact and connect back. And that led to a lot of conversations where, like you said, I would end up just talking, to be like, encourage that openness, but also talking to fill the space because it was so lopsided, and then you kind of feel like you're alone in that relationship in the strangest, bizarre way because it's intimate and yet you're very much alone in it. And so I found that with certain friendships like that, I now pull back, like you said, and I've stopped asking as many questions and I've kind of lengthened the time between when I talk to people where I get that feeling, and now I enter much more mindfully into friendships and conversations where I know that there's going to be a partnership within them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I don't really have much to say except for the reiteration that it feels like silence is such an alchemist. And if we give just that space for whatever has transpired between us to kind of intermingle and then come back and feed our imaginations and what's next true for us. That it's one of the things I'm really working on only because it has transformed me so significantly is my relationship to silence, and not just in partnering, but in friendships. And because I was a co-leader of a community for so many years, there was a lot of the role of, that I had taken on was to lead. And if you lead, you have an opinion, and you're expected to state it and then be able to back it up. And so, it just, you fall into this place of leadership, which is very compelling. And at the same time, right now I'm in a hiatus from that role, that identity, that entire persona that was wrapped up in being a yoga teacher and studio business owner and, in this area for 20 years. So we had quite the established community. And now I get to reinvent myself and the nature of those particular relationships, because I deeply care about the people that I would call friends and students. And so at first they were really uncomfortable with my silence. Like, what are you doing? Why are you not on social media? Why don't you do a blog? Why don't you, you have to contribute somehow. Like we're used to it. And so now I get to step back and be in this really silent place, which is, I'm not quite sure how next, what mechanism I will contribute. I know that it's part of who I am and who I want to be. So I know it will happen. But right now I'm in a deep pause.
I think the pause is beautiful. I don't know. I mean, in your 20s, did you find yourself like I call it chatter? Did you find yourself chattering a lot to make those connections and, talking and like in your head and talking at people? I think that's where the is.
Of course. I used to say that I was holding them hostage.
Yeah.
Right. The poor people there.
That's exactly what I feel like sometimes when I go near my own mother. I'm like, oh, I'm holding you hostage. That's so funny that you would say that. That's gorgeous. I love it.
I feel I'm learning. I'm an infant in this discovery, but I definitely have tasted the I guess the richness of quiet, and my mate currently teaches me also. He's really good. And so I said, have you ever heard the koan? I think it's Rumi. And then I know that Sai Baba has also been credited, but basically, before you speak, so before you interrupt that silence, because grand things are occurring there, have you asked yourself, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And is it the right time? Does it actually enrich the silence that was there previously, or is it taking something from it? And so I've been trying to, I told him that, and it was like, I said, because you embody this. And I just want to know, is it something you're practicing? You're very conscious of it, or this is just coming naturally to you? Because I'm working hard over here. You can't imagine how much I'm biting my tongue, biting my tongue, biding my time, just like waiting for, my turn.
Yeah.
And it's an immaturity in me that I'm really working with. So I like that. I like that it's a challenge, and he had never heard it, but now he says it to me back and reminds me like that's why he chose to talk to me about that particular thing when he did. It was the right time.
I love that you brought that up, because that's something that I'm definitely I'm a baby in that area as well. Sorry, my dog she's being ridiculous right now. She's trying to insert herself into our conversation. I'll have to share pictures of her. You would just love her.
I would love her.
She's magical. She's a magical creature. But yeah, I love that you brought that up. I'm a baby in the you could, but I love you, but you have to bugger off. I'm a baby in that area too, where it's, I used to listen, but I was listening for a pause where I could insert myself into the conversation. And I think there was a real time, and I think that had a lot to do with the intellectualism, and also self-identity, and, not wanting people to make assumptions about me. And so I'd be like, I wanted to let them know how smart I was when I found out how smart I was, which was it was a disaster. And it was so funny that the quiet thing, and I'll never forget this, because when I was younger, I didn't want people to know how smart I was, because I felt like then if they knew, then they would ask more of me, or, then I wouldn't be able to get away with as much.
Yeah, sure.
I remember my one friend Roger said, he goes, I'm not trying to be a dick about this. He says, but he's like, when I first met you, like, you're so bubbly and you're so kind of like sprightly and you're pretty, but you're like the cheerleader. I really just assumed you were stupid because you chattered a lot. He goes, but now that I know you a little bit better, he's like, I feel like all that chatter was really deceiving, and that you're a little bit diabolical underneath.
It was your smoke screen.
It was the smoke screen, and sometimes I wouldn't say I worry, but I wonder. I'm like, oh, podcast is so self-indulgent, because my favorite thing in the world to do is talk and connect. It really is. And I feel like the podcast might be a smokescreen just so I can talk to cool people like you, to be honest with you. But
well, it gives us opportunity too. And if people endeavor to listen, Undoubtedly, I think it just kind of works that way. We're going to pick up something. I do. Every single thing that I listen to or read, I pick up something that I can then use to either affirm the path I'm on or shift the path I'm on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you find yourself drawn just without even being realized, like to certain books that just feed whatever it is that you need to be talking about right then and there? Do you find yourself like, does that happen?
Yeah, I think if it isn't through books, it's through, a YouTube presentation, a speaker. It can be through something that a friend says, or I find like my body's really interesting that way. The world of supplements is very convoluted and overwhelming to me. And so I'm not one of those that does a lot of the hard research. And so then what I've said is, okay, universe, please excuse me. I just don't want to go down the Google rabbit hole on, let's say, DHEA or whatever. So then what I ask is just let one of my guides let me know. Mm-hmm. And so it's so cool because someone will say, oh, hey, did you realize like people just don't get enough vitamin D even in Colorado? And and it will be like, oh, I've never actually taken that or thought about it. But it's true. When I was writing the book, I was spending so much more time inside where I had been gardening in previous years in that creative time. And so, and I noticed that when I got back from Africa, I always felt so much healthier. Oh. And then I realized, oh, it's actually because I'm really out in the sun there and exposed. There is no insulation. So that vitamin D is actually really doing something for me. So little ways like that. I find that the messages come in the most amazing ways and synchronistic ways when we just ask for them. And it doesn't always have to be the same mechanism. We don't have to do necessarily all that research. We can just try something, And I'm talking about innocuous things, like these very easy to come by supplements. But yeah, things I'm reading. Also just, I think, dream interpretation, trying to get quiet enough to interpret and, remember and hear my dreams. Visualizations or thoughts that come up through meditation, poetry that I channel, the perfect conversation with my love, who, mostly has been with me through this whole, the viral lockdown, is that, it's just the two of us. And that's been really cool to just have to give each other enough silence that something beautiful can be born.
I love the way you just described that. That's remarkable. I think that was one of the last times that we spoke was you had actually just met him. And I don't want to pry or anything, anything that you're not comfortable sharing, but can you tell me more about how you came upon this relationship? I know we touched down on you chose him.
Yeah. So he was I was headed out. I had sold my business, sold the real estate that also the business was housed in. And I was heading out to Mexico to just really practice becoming like a lousy artist. I had all of these different mediums that I have yet to try. And I just want to see if I'm any good at, let's say paint versus like painting with words. And could I switch like that? And it felt like something really fun. I wanted to take dance lessons and do all these things that I haven't done in a while. And so I was headed out to Mexico, and my mom was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer and was also in the beginning of a completely failed marriage. And she needed to have a place to go through breast cancer. So she moved in with me. We hadn't lived together since I was 15. And we're in a small space, and my dreams are deferred, and her health is on the line. And it was a really intense time where that whole notion of trying to, manifest my partner, co-create my partner, whatever words you want to use there, it just completely evaporated. And I realized, oh, this is not the time. This is about caretaking. It's going to be intense. You're well versed in the natural world and in alternative therapies and Ayurveda, and your mom is going to go the more allopathic traditional chemotherapy and radiation route. And so there was a lot for me to learn, so I could support her in her choices. And it was a very, very difficult time. So I had completely abandoned all notion of finding someone because, well, for one, I just wasn't leaving the house. And when I did leave the house one day to help my mom out to the car with a basket, I felt from the corner this intensity. I don't know how to explain it. I looked at him, and the two of us just fell into another world, another dimension together. And he continued to cross the street, and we looked at each other 3 times, and he was walking his dog. These are the footsteps that I retraced afterwards. He was barefoot. Mm-hmm. I went inside, and I just felt like, okay, this is what it feels like to be struck by Cupid's arrow. This is it. And I, and then I tried to, then you step in and you say, oh my God, you're crazy. You can't make decisions like this. This is so impetuous. And anyhow, I did. And I decided for 6 weeks to try and find him. I never saw him again in the neighborhood until 6 weeks later, when we ran into each other, and it was just perfect. It was like we finally had the ability to say, oh yeah, I remember, you, and you make me feel something in my body that I haven't felt, and I have to at least explore that. And that was it. He moved in. This is how crazy, Rayanne. Mrs. so independent. She doesn't live with her partners. She doesn't want them to screw up her morning meditation routine and all these kinds of things. He moved in 3 weeks after our first date.
Wow.
Yeah, into a traumatized mother-daughter relationship that is, has the trappings of PTSD everywhere, because my poor mom had been through so much, and then cancer on top of it. I just don't know where this man came from, literally. And what he did was, not only did he neutralize the situation, he enhanced our relationship.
Oh, wow.
It was incredible. He was the perfect key for our dysfunctional lock that changed the castle, that the door was going into. It was really, really exceptional. And I think I've been kind of studying him ever since on the sly. Wondering, how did you do that? And so effortlessly. And, and my mom, she was a tough cookie, because again, like, it was really easy for her to say, all men,
mm-hmm.
all men. And then here's this very masculine man who's, 6'2", and I've got this, small little ceilings. And it was like, oh my God, the poor guy, like, hits his elbow every time he goes around a corner.
And you're so tiny, like.
Right, I'm tiny and he's so big. And so the two of us together we are the most hysterical union. And this is why I have to believe in the gods and goddesses, because you can't make this stuff up. And all the things that we take for granted, this is something that we're really working with right now, but mostly in relationship, the things you take for granted. So often socioeconomic background, culture, age, at least like sort of vicinity generation, race, all of these things, we don't have those in common. And so everything, what we have in common is this devotion to the work.
Oh, so beautiful.
Isn't that cool? Who knew that that was enough, and we really are committed. Like I told him, I said, I'm going to write an article for the Modern Love in the New York Times. I'm just going to submit this because it's the most bizarre thing. Like the things that people are having a difficulty discussing right now, you and I are forced to talk about. Mm-hmm. So we've had so many conversations about race and racism and where is it in us and prejudice and, how do you undo that generational trauma? So anyway, I feel really blessed. He's an amazing man. And consequently, I've decided that finally living in Africa full time is what I'm ready to do with him. And I don't have any tethers here that I can't uphold, from there.
Yeah. I am just in awe. I mean, number one, I want, you got to bring him on the podcast sometime. So
it would be great because I always tell him, Josephini, his name's Josephini or Oten, you can call him either. And so he models to me what good partnering looks like. And the craziest thing about it is I never dated. I was born with a certain amount of wisdom. I just was, and a lot of courage. And so I've always thought, well, I want to be with older men because they're going to be wiser. Right. And so all of my past partners were older. And I'd never dated younger. And he's 16 years younger.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, he's a millennial.
Wow.
And I'm like, I never would have thought that you would have these gems to teach me and to pass on. And I mean, I am the biggest student in his presence, and I really am humbled, thank God, in the relationship. So it's got the stuff of lasting, because we're fascinated by each other. And he would say the same of me. That's the really sweet thing, is he feels like he's a student. And so to be each other's teachers and students is just, it's more than I didn't even know to hope for that.
That is, just sitting here, I got all the warm fuzzy feelings all over.
Thank you. Well, that's why I'm saying, just, let's do this in a year.
Yes. Well, I want to come visit you in Africa. I think we talked about that. That is legitimately on my to-do list.
Yes. Yeah. And we're setting that up. We're going to set up, we're building a slightly bigger home than we would here. We're going to use recycled materials, and we're not going to cut down the trees to do it. Ghana is a lot of old growth rainforest. And so it's going to be, very different, but yeah, we're going to have space for exactly that, Rayanne. And
beautiful.
Yeah, that's the new, it's unformed. So I probably shouldn't even really give it words. It's probably not the right time, but it's definitely part of the vision, is that we want to have a place where our friends and people who are interested come and just kind of immerse in how, our sustainable attempt at living.
Well, within the culture, you're literally creating your own, I want to say, ecosystem, essentially. That's how I feel about it anyways. You're creating this sustainable way to live, body, mind, and spirit. And I think it's beautiful that you've chosen Africa to do that, so
me too.
I am all there, and I wanted to come over, and I wanted to work with the orphanages. That was my goal to do next year when this COVID thing kind of lets up, with the bioenergetics that I do and whatnot. So it'd be so cool to meet up and to be able to, be a part of your world and witness that and get to do some good somewhere. So
right. Oh, I love that. And so now that you've just said that, I'll just kind of keep it in my sphere here, where as I'm there and learning about the different ways that we can exchange, service and being served in Africa, and something that would interest you particularly. So, yeah. Thank you so much for having a podcast, for being courageous and inspired enough to do it. It's a lot of work, and I just admire that.
I want to thank you so much for just taking so much time out of your day to talk to me. It's such a beautiful conversation. I learned so much from you today, and just you're an incredible person. Can I, in the show notes, is it okay if I share, your website and your information, and if people want to reach out and get a copy of your book, where can they find that at?
I would love that. So right now, and that's a longer story, but basically you said it, micahspringer.com. And I will keep that live. It will probably be the mechanism by which I then engage with readers and people interested. If people were interested in the book, contact me via my website, and then I would contact the storing house, and they would ship it directly to the person. So not quite as quick as Prime. Probably, would take like 4 or 5 days. And the good news about the book is that every copy that has been printed is 100% sustainable, 100% PC recycled paper. And so I still feel good about that. The sad news is the original printing house and publisher went out of business after 46 years.
Oh.
So that's been very sad for me. I haven't been able to find another. I might republish Keepers of the Story in Ghana, and if there's interest there. So we'll see. That's one of my new goals, is to republish it where I'm living so that I can actively market it and then just really immerse in Africa. Yeah. But right now there are 400 copies remaining on the planet.
All right. Well, we are going to do our best to get those moved, because I just, I might even open up this podcast episode, if with your permission, reading a chapter or something like that from the book.
You're so dear. Whatever you, Rayanne, you have full access. Thank you for being such a fan, and also for getting it on such a deep level. That's the most gratifying part, is just to know that we've connected through this story and countless others now, and I'm very grateful for that. So,
wow. Me too.
Disclaimer. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not necessarily reflect the opinions or viewpoints of the host, producer, other guests, or sponsors. I, Rayanne K. Irving, am not, nor have I ever been, a doctor or therapist, and none of what I say is intended for professional or medical advice.